She should have died alone, gasping her last breath on a toxic alien world forgotten by humanity. But when the light faded, something impossible reached through the void. They looked nothing like us, made of light, energy, harmony. But their gift was simple: life. They asked for nothing in return, only that we remember. 40 years later, their light is dying, and the galaxy turns away. But Earth remembers. This is the story of a debt beyond blood, and a fleet that chose to burn bright when hope had gone dark. This is when angels wore alien faces. When angels wear alien faces, Dr. Sarah Martinez had always believed that the universe was fundamentally hostile to life. After 15 years, studying alien ecosystems across the galaxy's rim, she had seen countless worlds where existence clung desperately to harsh realities, where survival meant constant struggle against environments that seemed designed to kill anything foolish enough to try living there. Earth itself was proof of this harsh truth. A death world that had forged humanity through millions of years of predators, diseases, and natural disasters that would have wiped out most other species. But today, as she lay dying on the observation deck of Research Station Kepler 442b, Sarah was about to discover that the universe occasionally produced miracles that defied every scientific principle she had spent her career defending. The atmospheric processor had failed 3 days ago, flooding the station with toxic compounds from the planet's methane-rich atmosphere. Sarah's emergency suit had kept her alive longer than the rest of her team, but its filters were finally failing. She could taste the bitter metallic flavor that meant her oxygen scrubbers were overwhelmed, and her vision was starting to blur as carbon dioxide built up in her bloodstream. Through the station's viewing portal, she watched the alien landscape that had been her home for the past 6 months. Kepler 442b was a world of crystal formations and aurora-painted skies, beautiful in its alien majesty, but utterly incompatible with human life. The emergency beacon had been broadcasting for 72 hours, but the nearest Earth vessel was still 6 days away. Sarah would be dead long before rescue could arrive. As consciousness began to fade, Sarah found herself thinking about her daughter Emma, safe at university on Mars. At least Emma would understand that her mother had died, doing what she loved, pushing the boundaries of human knowledge into the vast unknown. The xenobiological samples Sarah had collected here would advance human understanding of life in the galaxy by decades, assuming anyone ever retrieved them from her lifeless station. That was when the impossible happened. Light began to coalesce in the station's main corridor, not the harsh artificial illumination of human technology, but something organic and warm that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Sarah's failing vision struggled to focus as the light took shape, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly but filled her with an inexplicable sense of peace and wonder. The beings that emerged from the light defied every category of life that Sarah had studied. They appeared to be composed of pure energy, their forms shifting and flowing like aurora made solid. Tall and graceful, they moved without touching the ground, their passage leaving trails of soft luminescence that made the station's sterile corridors feel like a cathedral filled with stained glass windows. 3 of them entered the observation deck where Sarah lay gasping for breath. The largest, whose energy patterns seemed more complex and ancient than the others, approached her with movements that suggested infinite patience and wisdom. When it spoke, the words bypassed her ears entirely, appearing in her mind with crystalline clarity that made human language seem crude and limited. "Human child, you are dying." The mental voice carried undertones of sorrow and compassion that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "We are the Veiltar, guardians of life's sacred flame. We cannot allow such a bright spark to be extinguished while we have the power to preserve it." Sarah tried to respond, but her throat was too damaged from the toxic atmosphere. The being seemed to understand her distress and moved closer, its luminous form radiating warmth that penetrated deep into her. "Bones, I am Keeper Ashral, eldest of this traveling circle. We sensed your life force weakening across the dimensional barriers that separate our realm from yours. Your species burns with such intensity, such passionate curiosity about the universe around you. We have watched humans for many cycles, admiring your courage in the face of impossible odds. The other two Veiltar began to circle Sarah, their forms weaving patterns that seemed to bend reality around them. As they moved, Sarah felt something extraordinary happening to her body. The burning in her lungs subsided, replaced by a cool sensation like breathing mountain air after a storm. Her vision cleared, and the metallic taste of poisoning faded from her mouth. What you are experiencing, Keeper Ashral explained, is the sharing of life force itself. We are beings of pure energy, existing primarily in dimensions adjacent to your physical realm. We can temporarily sustain your biological processes by lending you our own essence, but this gift comes at great cost to us. Sarah watched in amazement as the three Veiltar began to dim, their brilliant forms growing pale as they channeled their life energy into her dying body. She could feel their strength flowing into her, not just healing the damage from the toxic atmosphere, but filling her with vitality that seemed to make every cell in her body sing with renewed purpose. "Why?" Sarah managed to whisper, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "Why would you sacrifice yourselves for a stranger? We've never even met your species before." Keeper Ashral's form pulsed with what might have been gentle amusement. "Life recognizes life, child. Consciousness calls to consciousness across the void. Your species may be young by our standards, barely 2 centuries since you achieved interstellar travel, but you burn with a flame that illuminates the darkness of space itself." As the healing continued, Sarah felt her scientific mind struggling to process what was happening. The Veiltar were somehow converting their own existence into biological energy, compatible with human physiology, a feat that should have been impossible according to every law of physics she understood. Yet here she was, growing stronger with each passing moment while these magnificent beings grew weaker. "We have observed humans across many worlds," another Veiltar communicated, its mental voice younger but no less profound than Ashral's. "We have seen your courage in the face of the unknown, your willingness to sacrifice everything for knowledge and the protection of others. When the Terran vessel Courage's Edge saved the Altarian refugees from the solar flare, we were watching. When human colonists on Kepler 186f chose to share their limited resources with the stranded crystalline traders rather than let them die, we witnessed their generosity." The third Veiltar added its voice to the mental conversation. "Your species possesses something rare in this galaxy, human, Sarah. You have maintained your capacity for growth and change even as you have become powerful. Most civilizations that achieve interstellar capability become rigid, focused only on expansion and resource acquisition. Humans continue to surprise the universe with acts of unexpected kindness." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as the full magnitude of what was happening became clear. These beings were not just saving her life, they were sharing their very essence with her, giving her part of themselves that she would carry forever. The connection she felt to them was deeper than friendship, deeper than family. It was as if they had made her part of their eternal consciousness. "The healing is complete," Keeper Ashral announced, his form now noticeably dimmer than when he had first appeared. "Your body will recover fully from the poisoning, and your genetic structure has been subtly enhanced to better resist similar toxins in the future. You will live a long and productive life, human Sarah, contributing much to your species' understanding of the universe." Sarah struggled to sit up, her body feeling stronger than it had in years. "How can I ever repay this? You've given me everything and I have nothing to offer in return." "You misunderstand the nature of the gift," Ashral replied, his mental voice warm with affection. "We ask nothing of you personally, child, but we do ask something of your species. Remember this day. Remember that life is sacred, that consciousness is precious, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply choosing to help someone who cannot help themselves." The three Veiltar began to fade, their forms becoming translucent as they prepared to return to their own dimension. But before they departed completely, Keeper Ashral shared one final message that would echo in Sarah's mind for the rest of her life. "The universe is vast and often cruel, human Sarah. Civilizations rise and fall like waves upon a cosmic shore, but occasionally, in the darkness between the stars, acts of pure kindness create lights that burn for millennia. We have lit such a light today, not just in you, but in the connection between our species. Should the Veiltar ever face darkness, too great for us to overcome alone, we trust that humanity will remember this gift and choose to help in return. As the beings vanished completely, Sarah found herself alone on the observation deck of a station that no longer reeked of poison gas. The atmospheric processors hummed quietly in the background, somehow repaired and functioning perfectly. Her communication equipment, which had been damaged in the initial system failure, was now broadcasting a clear signal that would guide the rescue ship directly to her location. But the most profound change was within Sarah herself. She could feel a new awareness humming in her consciousness, a sensitivity to life force that allowed her to perceive the universe in ways that no human had ever experienced. Plants glowed with soft internal light, and the microscopic organisms in the station's recycling systems sparkled like tiny stars in her enhanced perception. The rescue ship Earth's Determination arrived 2 days later, finding Sarah healthy and alert despite the reports of catastrophic system failure. Captain Rodriguez listened with growing amazement as Sarah described her encounter with the Veiltar, recording every detail for transmission to Earth's xenological research divisions. Dr. Martinez, the captain said after hearing the complete account. If what you're describing is accurate, this represents the most significant first contact event in human history. These beings didn't just save your life, they potentially opened the door to an entirely new understanding of consciousness and energy manipulation. Sarah nodded, but her thoughts were focused on something more fundamental than scientific advancement. Captain, the important thing isn't what we can learn from them. The important thing is that they saved me without expecting anything in return. That kind of selfless generosity creates a debt that can never be measured or forgotten. The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks, during which Sarah began writing what would become known as the Veiltar Codex, a comprehensive account of her encounter and its implications for human philosophy and ethics. She described not just the technical aspects of their life force manipulation abilities, but the profound sense of wisdom and compassion that had radiated from every interaction. Upon her return to Earth, Sarah found herself at the center of intense scientific and political interest. The Global Defense Council wanted to know everything about Veiltar capabilities and potential threats. The scientific community was fascinated by the implications of consciousness-based energy manipulation. Religious leaders debated whether the Veiltar represented a form of divine intervention, or simply a more advanced understanding of universal forces. But Sarah's focus remained fixed on ensuring that humanity remembered the debt they owed. She established the Veiltar Cultural Foundation, dedicated to studying and preserving the memory of their encounter. The Foundation's archives became the official repository for all information about the energy beings, from Sarah's detailed personal accounts to the scientific analyses of her enhanced physiology. More importantly, Sarah worked with Earth's diplomatic corps to ensure that the debt to the Veiltar was formally recorded in humanity's official first contact protocols. Any future communication from the Veiltar would receive the highest priority response, and Earth committed to providing whatever assistance might be requested regardless of cost or risk. We must never forget that these beings gave up part of their own existence to save the life of a single human, Sarah testified before the Global Defense Council during the formal hearings. That kind of sacrifice creates obligations that transcend politics, economics, or strategic considerations. If the Veiltar ever need our help, humanity must respond with everything we have. Director Harrison of the Global Defense Council, a pragmatic man who had spent decades managing Earth's complex relationships with dozens of alien species, listened to Sarah's testimony with growing conviction. Dr. Martinez, are you seriously suggesting that Earth should commit to unlimited assistance based on a single rescue operation? Sarah's response would be remembered and quoted for generations. Director Harrison, they didn't just rescue me from death, they showed us what it means to value life above all other considerations. If humanity ever abandons that principle, if we ever become the kind of species that calculates the cost of helping others, then we will have lost the very quality that made us worth saving in the first place. The formal resolution passed unanimously, establishing what became known as the Veiltar Protocols. Earth's military forces, diplomatic corps, and scientific institutions All received standing orders that any communication from the Veiltar was to be treated as humanity's highest priority. Training programs were established to ensure that future generations would understand the significance of the debt and humanity's commitment to honoring it. Years passed, and Sarah's encounter became a foundational story in human culture, taught in schools alongside the great moments of human history. Children grew up learning about the energy beings who had saved Dr. Martinez's life and the promise humanity had made in return. Artists created magnificent works depicting the Veiltar's sacrifice, while philosophers debated the implications of their gift for human ethics and morality. Sarah herself continued her xenobiological research, but her work was forever changed by her enhanced perception of life force. She made breakthrough discoveries about consciousness and its relationship to biological processes, advancing human understanding of life itself by centuries. Her research stations became pilgrimage sites for scientists who wanted to study her unique abilities and the implications of human Veiltar contact. But perhaps the most important change was in humanity's approach to interstellar relations. The memory of Veiltar generosity influenced human diplomatic policy for decades, encouraging Earth to take on the role of protector for smaller species and mediator in galactic conflicts. Humanity's reputation as a species that honored its debts and protected the innocent spread throughout the galaxy, earning respect from civilizations that had previously dismissed humans as primitive newcomers. As the 40th anniversary of her rescue approached, Sarah often found herself standing in the observation lounge of her research station, looking out at the stars and wondering if the Veiltar were watching. Her enhanced perception sometimes caught glimpses of energy patterns in space that might have been their dimensional signatures, but she could never be certain. What she was certain of was that humanity had been forever changed by that single act of selfless kindness. The debt remained unpaid, recorded in Earth's most sacred archives and carried in the hearts of every human who understood what it meant to be saved by strangers who asked for nothing in return. Sarah often wondered if they would ever have the chance to repay that debt. She hoped they would never need to, that the Veiltar would continue their eternal guardianship of life throughout the galaxy, without ever facing dangers too great for them to handle alone. But if that day ever came, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that humanity would answer the call. The debt of life demanded nothing less than life in return, and humans had never been known to abandon their friends in their darkest hour. When light fades from the galaxy, 40 years had passed since Dr. Sarah Martinez's rescue, and she now stood as Director of Interspecies Relations for the United Earth Government, her silver hair and lined face bearing witness to decades of service, bridging the gap between humanity and the galaxy's diverse civilizations. Her office in the orbital headquarters above Earth displayed artifacts from dozens of first contact missions, each one representing a species that had learned to trust and respect humanity's unique approach to diplomacy. The enhanced perception she had gained from her encounter with the Veiltar had never faded. If anything, it had grown stronger over the years, allowing her to sense the emotional states and life force signatures of almost every species she encountered. This ability had made her invaluable as a negotiator and cultural interpreter, helping prevent conflicts that might have erupted from simple misunderstandings between radically different forms of consciousness. But today, as she reviewed reports from the galaxy's outer rim, Sarah felt something that chilled her to the bone. Her enhanced senses were detecting gaps in the cosmic tapestry of life, dark voids where thriving civilizations had existed just months before. Entire star systems had gone silent, their biosignatures simply vanishing from her perception as if they had never existed at all. The communication that changed everything arrived during a routine diplomatic briefing. The quantum transmission was barely coherent, fragmented by distance and what appeared to be massive interference from some unknown source. When the translation protocols finally decoded the signal, Sarah recognized the distinctive harmonic patterns that could only come from one source. "Emergency transmission from the Veiltar Collective," announced her communications officer, Lieutenant Torres, his voice tight with excitement and concern. "Signal is badly degraded, but we're getting enough fragments to piece together a basic message." Sarah's heart began racing as the translation appeared on her main display. After 40 years of hoping for contact, The Veiltar were finally reaching out to humanity. But as she read the fragmented message, her excitement turned to horror. Keepers of the sacred flame. Under assault by ancient darkness, the Devourers have awakened, consuming life force across 17 sectors. Our dimensional barriers, failing. Many circles already lost to the void. Request immediate assistance. Remember the gift of life. Humanity must answer. The message deteriorated into static, but Sarah had heard enough. She immediately activated Earth's highest priority communication protocols, summoning the Global Defense Council for an emergency session. As alarms echoed through the orbital complex, Sarah's mind raced through the implications of what she had just learned. The Devourers. Even the name sent shivers through her enhanced consciousness. During her decades of research into consciousness and life force phenomena, Sarah had occasionally encountered references to ancient entities that existed purely to consume and destroy. Most xenobiologists dismissed these references as mythological, the galactic equivalent of ghost stories told around campfires. But the Veiltar's terror suggested that these legends were horrifyingly real. Within 2 hours, Earth's most powerful leaders had assembled in the council chamber. Admiral Chen Wei, the grizzled commander of Earth's space forces, sat beside Director Harrison, now in his 70s but still sharp as a plasma cutter. Representatives from the major colonies, the scientific community, and Earth's allied species filled the remaining seats, all struggling to understand the crisis that was unfolding. "Show them everything," Sarah commanded her aide, who activated the chamber's holographic display system. The fragmented Veiltar transmission played again, its broken harmonics filling the room with an almost tangible sense of desperation and fear. Admiral Chen leaned forward, his scarred hands clasped on the table before him. "Director Martinez, can you give us any context for this message? What exactly are these Devourers, and why are the Veiltar afraid of them?" Sarah stood before the assembly, drawing on 40 years of research and her unique understanding of consciousness-based phenomena. Based on the xenobiological records and my enhanced perception abilities, the Devourers appear to be parasitic entities that exist in the dimensional spaces adjacent to our reality. Unlike normal life forms that convert matter and energy for sustenance, these things feed directly on consciousness itself. The implications of her words sent a visible shudder through the assembled leaders. Dr. Amanda Foster, head of Earth's Xenobiological Research Division, raised her hand with obvious concern. "Director, are you suggesting that these entities literally consume awareness? That they can drain the life force from living beings?" "Not just drain it," Sarah replied grimly. "According to the fragmentary records I've been able to piece together, from various galactic archives, the Devourers don't just kill their victims. They absorb their entire consciousness, every memory, every thought, every aspect of what made that being unique. Death leaves echoes in the quantum field that sensitive individuals can detect. Devourer victims leave nothing behind at all." Admiral Chen was already pulling up tactical displays, his military mind automatically shifting to defensive planning. "How fast do they move? What kind of threat are we looking at in terms of timeline?" Sarah activated her personal data pad and displayed the sensor readings she had been tracking for the past several weeks. 17 star systems have gone completely silent in the last 60 days. Based on the pattern of disappearances, I estimate the Devourers are moving through inhabited space at a rate that will bring them to Earth's sector within 18 months. The silence that followed was profound. Director Harrison finally spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of impossible decisions. "Sarah, you're asking us to consider military action against entities we don't understand, to protect beings we've had no contact with for 4 decades, based on a debt that most of our current leadership had nothing to do with." Before Sarah could respond, Admiral Chen stood up, his expression grim but determined. "Director Harrison, with respect, it doesn't matter whether current leadership was involved in creating the debt. The Veiltar saved one of ours when they had no obligation to do so. If we abandon them now, what does that say about humanity's word? What does that say about who we are as a species?" Dr. Foster added her voice to the growing debate. "There's also the practical consideration that if these Devourers consume consciousness itself, They represent an existential threat to all life in the galaxy. This isn't just about honoring a debt anymore. This is about survival. Sarah felt a surge of pride in her species as she watched the debate unfold. The leaders were asking the right questions, weighing moral obligations against practical limitations, but she could see in their faces that they had already reached the same conclusion she had drawn. Humanity would answer the call, regardless of the cost. The question, Director Harrison said finally, is whether we can actually do anything meaningful to help. Our military forces are designed for conventional warfare against species with similar technological limitations. How do you fight entities that exist partially outside our dimensional space? Sarah had been dreading this question because she knew the answer would sound like madness to anyone who hadn't experienced Veiltar consciousness sharing firsthand. There is a way, she said quietly, but it requires us to take risks that no human military force has ever attempted. She activated the Chamber's quantum modeling system, displaying theoretical frameworks that had taken her research teams decades to develop. The Veiltar's life force manipulation abilities aren't magic. They're based on consciousness resonance patterns that can be artificially generated and amplified. If we modify our ship's power systems to create harmonic resonance fields, we might be able to disrupt the Devourer's ability to feed on consciousness. Admiral Chen studied the technical displays with growing interest. You're talking about turning our entire fleet into some kind of psychic weapon system. The engineering challenges alone would be staggering. The engineering challenges are nothing compared to the power requirements, Sarah replied. To generate consciousness resonance fields powerful enough to affect entities like the Devourers, our ships would need to tap directly into the life force of their crews. Every human aboard would essentially be volunteering to share their life energy to power the weapon systems. The implications hit the assembled leaders like a physical blow. Dr. Foster was the first to speak. Sarah, you're describing a military strategy based on human sacrifice. You're asking our people to literally give their lives to power weapons that might not even work against an enemy we've never encountered. I'm asking them to do exactly what the Veiltar did for me 40 years ago, Sarah replied firmly. To sacrifice part of their own existence to save strangers who cannot save themselves. The difference is that we'll be doing it as soldiers rather than healers, and we'll be giving our lives to preserve life rather than to directly heal it. When humanity chose to burn bright, the journey to the Outer Rim took 6 weeks through hyperspace, during which Admiral Chen Wei's fleet underwent the most radical transformation in military history. In the cargo bays of every ship, human engineers worked around the clock installing consciousness resonance systems that defied every conventional understanding of warfare. These weren't weapons in any traditional sense, but rather devices that could channel human life force itself into focused beams of pure awareness that might disrupt the Devourer's ability to consume consciousness. Dr. Sarah Martinez spent most of the journey in meditation, using her enhanced Veiltar-gifted perception to probe ahead through dimensional space, searching for any trace of the energy beings who had saved her life 4 decades ago. What she found was heartbreaking. Where once she had sensed the warm, brilliant consciousness signatures of thriving Veiltar circles throughout the galaxy, now there were only scattered flickers, isolated survivors fleeing through dimensional barriers that were growing thinner. With each passing day, Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Determination, watching his tactical displays track the fleet's progress through space that had once been filled with vibrant civilizations. Now they passed through stellar graveyards, systems where planets still orbited their stars but no longer showed any signs of life whatsoever. The Devourer's path of consumption was marked by a trail of dead worlds that stretched across hundreds of light years. Admiral, reported Lieutenant Commander Torres from the communication station, we're receiving a faint transmission on Veiltar frequencies. It's badly distorted, but Dr. Martinez might be able to interpret it. Sarah hurried to the bridge, her enhanced senses immediately locking onto the harmonic patterns that were distinctly Veiltar in origin. But these harmonics were weak and filled with static, like voices calling from the bottom of a deep well. When she finally decoded the message, it was from Keeper Ashrel himself, the ancient being who had saved her life. Human Sarah, if you can hear this transmission, The situation is more desperate than we first communicated. The Devourers are not just ancient entities awakened from dormancy. They are the remnants of our own kind, Veiltar, who fell to darkness eons ago and now seek to consume all consciousness to fill the emptiness where their own awareness once existed. The revelation struck Sarah like a physical blow. The Devourers weren't alien invaders but rather corrupted Veiltar, beings who had somehow lost their connection to the life force they had once protected and now existed only to devour what they could no longer create or sustain. Ashral's message continued, growing weaker with each transmitted word. They know our defensive techniques, our dimensional sanctuary protocols, our methods of consciousness manipulation. We cannot hide from them because they were once us. The few remaining keepers have gathered in the Nexus dimension, but our barriers are failing. Perhaps your species' unique approach to consciousness can succeed where our ancient wisdom has failed. The transmission provided coordinates to a dimensional rift where the surviving Veiltar were making their last stand. Admiral Chen immediately ordered the fleet to change course, pushing their engines to maximum capacity despite the risk of mechanical failure. They had perhaps hours before the last of the galaxy's consciousness guardians were consumed by their own fallen kindred. As they approached the coordinate location, Sarah felt her enhanced perception overwhelmed by the psychic chaos surrounding the dimensional rift. The fabric of reality itself seemed to be under assault, with waves of consuming darkness clashing against barriers of pure life force in a battle that transcended physical space and touched the very foundations of existence itself. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace to witness a sight that defied description. Massive entities of writhing shadow were assaulting a crystalline structure that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions, their tendrils of absolute darkness reaching through reality to drain the life force from everything they touched. The structure was clearly Veiltar in origin, but it was failing, its brilliant surfaces growing dim as the Devourers pressed their relentless attack. "My God," whispered Admiral Chen as he watched the cosmic battle unfold on his tactical displays. "How do we even begin to fight something like that?" Sarah studied the energy patterns, her enhanced senses analyzing the interaction between the Devourers and their Veiltar prey. The Devourers are consuming consciousness by creating anti-resonance fields that cancel out life force signatures. But they're having to maintain those fields against active resistance, which means they're vulnerable during the feeding process. Dr. Foster, who had insisted on joining the mission despite the dangers, looked up from her sensor readings with grim determination. The consciousness resonance systems are ready for activation, but I need to warn everyone again about what we're asking our people to do. Powering these weapons will literally drain years from their lives. Many won't survive the process. Admiral Chen activated the fleet-wide communication system, his voice carrying to every ship in the Armada. "All vessels, this is Admiral Chen. You can see what we're facing. The enemy before us has consumed entire civilizations, and they're about to finish off the last survivors of the species that saved one of our own 40 years ago. I won't lie to you about the odds. Our weapon systems require life force to function, and using them will cost us dearly. But if we succeed here, today we'll have honored humanity's word and protected consciousness itself from extinction." The response came back from hundreds of ships simultaneously, thousands of voices united in purpose. "Understood, Admiral. We're ready to burn bright." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she sensed the collective determination of the human fleet. Every crew member understood the sacrifice they were about to make, and every single one of them had chosen to proceed anyway. This was humanity at its finest, willing to give everything to keep a promise made decades ago to strangers who had asked for nothing in return. "All ships, begin consciousness resonance system activation," Admiral Chen commanded. "Dr. Martinez, can you establish communication with the surviving Veiltar?" Sarah closed her eyes and extended her enhanced perception through the dimensional barriers, searching for familiar consciousness signatures among the chaos. When she found Keeper Ashral, his mental voice was barely a whisper compared to the powerful presence she remembered from her rescue. "Human Sarah, you came. After all these cycles, after all that has transpired, humanity remembered. We keep our promises, Keeper Ashral. Sarah replied through the psychic link. Tell me how to coordinate our attack. We have weapons powered by human life force that might be able to disrupt the Devourer's feeding process. Impossible, Ashral responded, his mental voice filled with wonder. Your species would sacrifice their own life essence to save ours? The cost to your people would be enormous. The cost of abandoning you would be greater, Sarah replied firmly. We learned something from you 40 years ago about what it means to value life above all else. Today we get to prove that we were listening. The human fleet spread out in formation around the dimensional rift, their consciousness resonance systems beginning to draw power from the life force of their volunteer crews. Sarah could feel the energy building, thousands of human minds focusing their will and determination into weapons that had never been tested against an enemy like this. On the bridge of the determination, crew members began showing the physical effects of powering the resonance systems. Hair turned gray, lines appeared on faces, and some of the younger officers aged visibly as their life force was channeled into the ship's weapons. But not one of them wavered in their commitment. Resonance systems at full power, reported Lieutenant Commander Torres, his voice steady despite the fact that he now appeared to be in his 60s rather than his 30s. All ships report ready for coordinated strike. Admiral Chen, who had insisted on personally overseeing the flagship's weapons system, looked decades older than he had an hour ago, but his eyes burned with determination as he gave the order that would change the course of galactic history. All ships, fire! 847 beams of pure consciousness energy lanced out from the human fleet, each one powered by the life force of crews who were literally giving years of their existence to create weapons that shouldn't have been possible. The beams struck the Devourers with devastating effect, disrupting their anti-resonance fields and causing them to release their grip on the Veiltar sanctuary. The corrupted entities reeled back from their assault, their forms writhing as the consciousness resonance weapons interfered with their ability to process and consume life force. For the first time in eons, the Devourers found themselves facing an enemy they couldn't simply devour. But the victory was temporary. The Devourers adapted quickly, their ancient intelligence finding ways to counter the human weapons. They began generating shield fields that deflected the consciousness beams while maintaining their assault on the Veiltar sanctuary. They're learning too fast, Dr. Foster reported, her own appearance dramatically aged by the strain of maintaining the weapon systems. Our current strategy isn't sustainable. They'll adapt completely within minutes. Sarah felt the weight of command decisions settling on her shoulders. She was the only human who truly understood Veiltar consciousness manipulation, which meant she was the only one who might be able to find a solution. But the answer that came to her required a sacrifice that she wasn't sure she had the right to ask for. Admiral, she said quietly, there is one more option. If I use my enhanced Veiltar abilities to create a consciousness resonance cascade, I might be able to overload the Devourer's adaptation systems, but it would require channeling the life force of the entire fleet through a single focal point. Admiral Chen understood immediately. You're talking about using yourself as a living weapon, powered by the life force of 40,000 crew members. Sarah, that would kill you and probably most of our people. It would also create a consciousness resonance pulse powerful enough to either destroy the Devourers completely or trap them in dimensional prison from which they could never escape, Sarah replied. The Veiltar could rebuild their civilization, and the galaxy would be safe from this threat forever. The bridge fell silent as everyone processed the implications of what Sarah was proposing. She was asking them to sacrifice not just years of their lives, but their lives entirely, in one final gambit to honor humanity's debt to the Veiltar. Admiral Chen spoke for all of them when he said, Dr. Martinez, if you believe this plan will work, then we'll do it. We came here to honor a debt and protect innocent life. If this is what it takes, then this is what we'll do. Sarah felt the collective agreement ripple through the fleet as Admiral Chen explained the plan over the communication system. To her amazement, not a single ship requested permission to withdraw. 40,000 human beings were volunteering to give their lives to keep a promise made by their species decades ago. Keeper Ashral, Sarah communicated through the psychic link. We're going to attempt something that will either save you or destroy us all. If we succeed, use the time we buy you to rebuild and remember. Remember that once, when you needed help, humanity chose to burn bright rather than let the darkness win. We will remember, human Sarah. Across all time and all dimensions, the Veiltar will remember. Sarah took her position at the Consciousness Resonance Control Station, feeling the life force of 847 ships beginning to flow through her enhanced Veiltar abilities. The sensation was indescribable, like holding the combined hopes and dreams of an entire species in her hands while preparing to transform them into a weapon of pure will and determination. All ships begin final energy transfer, Admiral Chen commanded, his voice carrying across the fleet for the last time. It has been an honor to serve with you all. The resonance cascade began slowly, building power as Sarah channeled the life force of tens of thousands of volunteers into a single focused beam of consciousness energy. She felt her body beginning to transform, becoming a conduit for power that no human was meant to contain. But she also felt the presence of every crew member who was giving their life to make this moment possible, their courage and determination flowing through her like a river of liquid starlight. When she finally released the cascade, it was like watching a new star being born. The consciousness resonance pulse that erupted from the human fleet was visible across multiple dimensions, a brilliant explosion of pure awareness that struck the Devourers with the combined will of humanity's finest heroes. The corrupted Veiltar entities had no defense against an attack powered by such selfless sacrifice. Their forms began to collapse, their ability to consume consciousness overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of life force that Sarah was channeling through her connection to both human and Veiltar awareness. One by one, they were drawn into dimensional rifts that sealed behind them, trapping them in empty spaces between realities where they could never again threaten conscious life. As the last devourer vanished into imprisonment, Sarah felt her connection to the fleet beginning to fade. She had channeled more power than any single consciousness could contain, and her enhanced physiology was finally reaching its limits. But she had succeeded. The galaxy was safe, the Veiltar could rebuild, and humanity had proven that some debts were worth any price to repay. Keeper Ashral's mental voice reached her as she began to fade. Human Sarah, your species has given everything to save ours. What can we possibly do to honor such sacrifice? Sarah's final message was transmitted not just to Ashral, but to every surviving Veiltar consciousness in the galaxy. Remember us. Remember that once, when you needed help, humanity chose to honor its debts no matter the cost. And when other species need help in the future, remember what you learned from watching us burn bright in the darkness. The consciousness resonance cascade finally ended, leaving behind empty human ships drifting in space around a dimensional rift that now pulsed with renewed Veiltar energy. The cost had been enormous. An entire fleet had given their lives to power Sarah's final gambit. But they had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes. In the aftermath of the battle, the surviving Veiltar began the slow process of rebuilding their civilization. But they did so with a new understanding of what it meant to sacrifice for others, learned from watching humanity give everything to honor a debt that could never truly be repaid. Across the galaxy, the story spread of the human fleet that had died to save strangers who had once saved one of their own. Other species began to understand that having Earth as an ally meant more than military protection or trade agreements. It meant being part of a community where debts of kindness were honored regardless of cost, and where the strong would always sacrifice to protect the innocent. The empty human ships were towed back to Earth, where they became monuments to the 40,000 heroes who had chosen to burn bright rather than let the darkness win. Their names were inscribed in halls of honor, and their story became a foundational legend in human culture. But perhaps the greatest monument was the network of Veiltar guardians who spread throughout the galaxy, protecting young civilizations and offering aid to those in need. They carried with them the memory of humanity's sacrifice, and the lesson that true strength lay not in the power to destroy, but in the willingness to give everything to preserve life and consciousness in all its forms. The debt had been repaid, but the legacy would endure forever. Humanity had proven that some bonds transcend species, time, and even death itself. In a galaxy often ruled by fear and self-interest, they had shown that courage, honor, and selfless love could still light the way forward into an uncertain future. And in the dimensional spaces where the Veiltar dwelt, a new harmony was sung, the song of humanity's sacrifice, which would echo through eternity as a reminder that sometimes, when faced with impossible choices, the greatest victory comes, not from surviving but from choosing to burn bright enough to light the way for others. If you like this story, please like it and leave your feedback in the comments. Subscribe for more stories.